Welcome, everyone. Hello, I'm Patty Dreyer. I am the president of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation, and we are really excited to have you here with us today. I'll be your MC. I've got that great honor for sure. We are live streaming this event. I'm located in Stevens Point, the heart of Wisconsin, and we're going to have guests who are from all over the state to join us at this event today. I'm right here in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Gallery at Schmeeckley Reserve Visitor Center at the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point campus. I am again thrilled to have you join us. For today, we are going to honor a man who has dedicated his life to protecting water. There's a quote by Tanaka Shozo that reads, "The care of rivers is not a question of rivers, but of the human heart." For Steve Bourne, I think you'll come to see that his work as a conservationist was and continues to be guided by his heart, his passion for leaving the world better through his work, and his love of everything trout as one inspiration for driving that work. For Steve's ceremony today, I asked my husband, Tom, who's a fly tyer, to create an everything trout fly tied pin. And I just thought it would bring an extra smile to everybody's face today in honor of Steve Bourne. Also being honored today at separate events are Jens Jensen at 11 o'clock, Stan Temple at 1 o'clock, Gary Eldred at 3 o'clock, and you may still register for any of these upcoming events at wchf.org. Just click on the 2021 Induction tab. We'd like to thank our event sponsors, the Aldo Leopold Foundation, Ice Age Trail Alliance, Jaeger Mellerop Family Charitable Trust, Luther College, Midwest Renewable Energy Association, Museum of Danish America, the Prairie Enthusiasts, Trout Unlimited Wisconsin Council, Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, and the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. Let me share with you how this event will flow. It'll feature two distinguished guests who will highlight Steve's life and career, and then we'll present Steve with the official recognition from the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation. Steve will then share some words, and we'll follow with a legislative citation from the state of Wisconsin. At the close of this ceremony today, we'll again show the video montage from the opening of this event. We know you'll want to watch it again and again. We'll then turn on the chat feature, and that'll be an opportunity for you who are watching this event live today to tap in some remarks, some memories, some gratitudes to Steve. It's our virtual way to shake Steve's hand to greet him in a congratulatory receiving line today. So let's begin with some background on the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame and the induction process.
The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation was created in 1984 to encourage the growth and practice of a conservation ethic as a legacy for the people of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame is a nonprofit organization guided by a board of directors representing more than 30 conservation organizations. Each year, the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame inducts up to 3 people into the Hall of Fame. To date, there are over 100 inductees who have been honored. You can learn about each of these conservation champions on the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame website or by visiting the Hall of Fame Gallery. The Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Gallery of Inductees is located in beautiful Schmeeckley Reserve, which is a natural area on the campus of the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, with 5 miles of nature trails and wildlife viewing opportunities. Inside the Schmeeckley Reserve Visitor Center, guests can view engraved wooden plaques about inductees, with quotes highlighting their contributions. A touchscreen computer gives visitors a chance to connect with Wisconsin's conservation heritage as they browse the stories and learn about the achievements of each inductee. Any person or organization can nominate someone for induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Nominees have an array of environmental and conservation-related backgrounds and varying types of education and experience. From writers to artists, from educators to policymakers, from researchers to managers, Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame heroes come from all backgrounds and walks of life. Based on standards and criteria set by the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Board of Directors, all inductees must have significant ties to Wisconsin, and their contributions must have wide-reaching impact, affecting a range of natural resources. Each summer, a 5-member Board of Governors reviews nominations. The highly esteemed governors are an independent body and have in-depth knowledge of Wisconsin's conservation history. The governors select 5 nominations to forward to the Board of Directors for their consideration. The Board of Directors select the following year's inductees from that list of finalists at their annual fall meeting. While voting membership in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame is only open to organizational members of the foundation, individuals may participate in the mission by providing annual support as affiliate members. The financial support of member organizations and affiliate members allows the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame to celebrate, advance, and share Wisconsin's conservation legacy as it hosts induction ceremonies and maintains inductee archives. We invite you to learn more about the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame and Wisconsin's conservation heritage by visiting our website at wchf.org.
I'd like to introduce you now to our first speaker today for Steve Bourne. The speaker's name is Harry Peterson. Harry is President Emeritus, Western Colorado University, Gunnison, Colorado, and he's a former administrator at UW-Madison.
Thank you, Patty. I am delighted to be here today, as I'm sure all of you are, and I'm so pleased that this event is finally taking place. Like you, I think it would be great if we were all in Stevens Point together. On the other hand, some of you can attend our virtual gathering who are in different parts of the country. My role today will be to talk about Steve Bourne, a friend, a citizen, and a devoted father. Todd Ames will talk about Steve's professional accomplishments. I've been a friend and colleague of Steve since the mid-70s when he and I served in Governor Lucey's administration. We've worked together and we fished together. When he and I were at the UW-Madison, my office was in the chancellor's office and Steve was in Music Hall, both facing Bascom Hall. When he was in his office, which was often, I would stop by and we'd talk about the issues of the day, including our own lives. Those conversations were often the highlight of the day during some demanding times. I've known about the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for a long time. I became better acquainted with it in 2005 when my friend Bud Jordahl, a close colleague of Steve's, was inducted into the hall. I was fortunate to ride to the meeting with people who have made wonderful contributions to Wisconsin conservation. Our driver was Howard Mead, who along with his wife Nancy founded the Wisconsin Trails magazine. Also Nina Leopold Bradley, who many of you knew, and our honored guest today, Steve Bourne. After that event, as I read each year about inductees, I thought, why not Steve Bourne? So I asked people who knew Steve and his contributions to help me identify people who could help with the nominations. The responses were enthusiastic. I stopped asking for letters at about 14 people. Their letters I included in my nomination. On a personal note, I am delighted that our nominee is alive and well, as is his nominator and all 14 letter writers. The letters mostly provided information on Steve's professional accomplishments, but invariably they included personal comments as well. One wrote, "Our best teachers are remembered not for their skill at passing along the nuts and bolts of how a discipline works, but for their contribution for what a discipline does for people." Geordie Jordahl, the son of inductee Bud Jordahl, wrote, "He was my father's most trusted colleague, poker foe, and friend." So what kind of a guy is Steve Bourne? Well, he's bigger than life, and not just the fact that he's 6'3". He doesn't know everybody, but he knows a lot of people. On one of my fishing trips to Montana, I saw two fishermen on a stream years ago. When I told them I was from Wisconsin, they said, "We know Steve Bourne." So not everybody outside of Wisconsin first thinks of the Green Bay Packers when they think of Wisconsin. When I visit well-known fly fishing shops out west, I sometimes casually mention that I know Steve. Invariably, they know him or know of him. When Trout Unlimited wanted to get acquainted with the new DNR secretary, Kathy Stepp, and wanted her to understand conservation and fishing, TU turned to Steve. She accepted his invitation and to introduce her to fishing. Steve is the guy who helps people. When Steve and other friends and I meet for coffee at the Union Terrace, former grad students often come by and say hello, tell him what they are doing, and they seek his advice. When a neighbor living alone and in failing health needed help, Steve visited each day to see how the neighbor was doing. When the neighbor died, it was Steve who discovered the body, and he had the difficult assignment of calling the son of the deceased friend of his. A recently deceased local fly fisherman was a wonderful fisherman, but he had a tough life. This individual had even more delusions than the rest of us fly fishers, claiming among other things that he had fished with Jimmy Carter on Black Earth Creek. Steve looked after him and for many years hosted a dinner in his home to provide support for him. For years, Steve has hosted an event at his home in February, at a time when we fly fishers are anxious to get warmer so we can get on the stream again. This is known as Boys' Night Out, and it features about 20 people. The guests are also the chefs, and they bring game they have shot, especially pheasant and deer, sometimes other entrees. The challenge of bagging the occasional squirrel for the event is not as great as preparing that tiny morsel. Eating that occasional squirrel is also a challenge. I've learned to be careful of the rib cage bones. Boys' Night Out also serves to foster the illusion, at least for several hours, that we could, if we're pressed, defend for ourselves without our spouses. An illusion indeed. I suspect that some of you are cringing at the datedness of the term Boys' Night Out, just to demonstrate that Steve is firmly planted in the 21st century. He has invited women to the event in recent years. And though the women don't do the cooking, this not only reflects Steve's embracing changing times, but has been made possible by coveted invitations to this event by the occasional mortality among our longtime dinner companions. Steve, as all of you know, is a fly fisherman. As one who helped introduce him to the sport and has fished with him many times, I can report with other things in his life he's quite accomplished. And the person who introduced him to fly fishing, myself, is not as good a fly fisherman as is Steve. However, there was a fish that many consider the most difficult to catch that eluded him for 20 years. That would be a permit, a fish that for many years was believed to never take a fly. After 40 years of intensive effort, it has been revealed that the permit will occasionally take a fly, but it did not take Steve's fly for a very long time. And when it did, it quickly spit out the fly. Until a trip that Steve and I made to Belize about 6 years ago, which I captured on film. I begin by showing you a photo of the conditions. The water is a couple feet deep. It is extremely warm and humid. The wind is strong, and invariably it is in your face. The guide often spots fish first. You get out of the boat, led by the guide, and doing what he tells you to do, or trying to. A word about the guides. This is a prestigious, well-compensated position in those countries that requires years of training. Invariably, the guides not only possess great skill, but they're very macho. They groan when you cast badly, which you often do, especially when an elusive fish is your target. When you do hook a fish, they immediately begin giving incited instructions to an already overly excited fly fisher. Let me be clear. The guides are uninterested in anything else that you might have accomplished in the rest of your life. They typically treat CEOs of large companies like everyone else, badly. They treat Steve somewhat better because of his physical size and also because he's a better caster than most of us. Your success is the guide's success. They brag to their fellow guides about the success of their client back at the lodge each evening. However, failure is all your own. Your failure was despite their best efforts as guides. Now, I know that some of the people watching this program are faculty members or have been faculty members, and this, I think, admittedly, we'd say this is a strange theory of pedagogy, perhaps coming from the 19th century, but it persists nonetheless. So Steve brought 20 years of effort to this effort to catch a permit. Of course, I would not be telling you this if Steve was yet again unsuccessful. He caught the fish, it fought hard, and he and the guide brought it to the boat. Here is Steve and the guide with the coveted permit. Finally, here is Steve on the way back to the lodge and what must be one of the most happy days of his life. Steve, to his credit, the next day when he went out with a different fishing partner, basically devoted his friend and fishing partner to help that friend catch a permit that day. And Steve did not fish, having said, well, I've caught my permit and now I can relax. Fishers sometimes say they are as happy when their friend catches a fish as if they had caught the fish themselves. Let's be clear, they're lying. So while I would never make that statement, I can say I came closest to being as happy for my fellow fly fisher on that day as I have ever been. We've all had life-changing moments. When they occur, a photographer is rarely present. I was happy to be there that day. Now, we all know from our own lives that our personal lives and our professional lives overlap. We are, after all, one person. So I close by quoting a person whose life was enriched by Steve, among the many other lives he has enriched. Kathleen Falk was for many years the Dane County executive. Upon learning that Steve was about to be recognized, she wrote him a letter. Steve, she wrote, you belong in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for many reasons. The obvious professional ones will be noted by many, but the most important to me is how you encouraged women to succeed. You believed in me when I was a new lawyer on the court, when I was the first woman to run for Dane County executive and governor, when I first learned to fly fish at the course that you taught. Thanks for the difference you made with policy at every level, and thanks for the differences you have made in my life. Your friend and fan, Kathleen Falk. Congratulations, Steve.
Thank you, Harry. It's great to have this technology today to share the room with you. Our next speaker for Steve Bourne is Todd Ames. Todd is Deputy Secretary of our Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources.
Morning. When I arrived here in Wisconsin 25 years ago, the moment that I mentioned my interest in environmental issues, water and rivers, virtually every person that I spoke with said, you have to meet Steve Bourne. And then when I did, this guy, who was already a conservation legend, clutching his now all too familiar pipe and ratty knapsack, welcomed me to the state and urged me to join the collective effort for the waters of Wisconsin. And a quarter of a century later, here we are. How does one best attempt to capture the essence of a person's life work in a few short minutes? Let's start with the words of Norman MacLean. My father was very unsure about certain matters pertaining to the universe. To him, all good things, trout, as well as eternal salvation, come from grace. And grace comes by art, and art does not come easy. Art does not come easy. In his great work, A River Runs Through It, MacLean, to me, captures the essence of the drive that propelled Steve Bourne to his many achievements. And of course, as Harry has noted, there has to be trout. Steve was born in Chicago. He grew up with a father who had passion and commitment as a labor organizer and activist for working people. That drive to organize and lead rubbed off on Steve early, and no one who knows him now would be surprised to hear that he was his high school senior class president. Art does not come easy. Steve worked a series of what he calls hideous jobs to raise money for college at the University of Illinois. Hard work was the norm for this guy, and for much of his life, work and avocation have had a seamless interaction. In college, both geology and ichthyology caught his attention. By the end of undergrad and then graduate school at the University of Oregon, seems fitting that a water guy would become a duck, Steve had degrees in geology, a reputation as a very good bridge player. He had discovered trout fishing out west, and he then began a career with the Shell Oil Company. Art does not come easy. For several years, Steve worked hard to build a bright career at Shell. He learned much from preeminent geophysicists of the day, experienced the hard physical work on oil rigs, and gradually came to a life-changing decision to not get locked into a corporate career and to instead pursue a PhD. So he arrived in Madison in the late 60s to work on his doctorate. While working on his dissertation during that turbulent time in history, we can all be grateful to several people at the University of Wisconsin who convinced Steve to interview for a position with something called the Inland Lake Project. And thus began Steve's love affair with the waters of Wisconsin. His work as director of the Inland Lake Project would eventually lead to joining the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the UW in 1971. The Inland Lake Project was a joint Wisconsin DNR and UW Extension appointment, and the connection to UW Extension was a pivotal one for Steve. Through UW Extension, Steve would conduct cutting-edge work on river, groundwater, and coastal planning and management, local watershed stewardship, and land use planning and conservation. And it is this holistic approach that, to me, is some of the secret to the art of Steve's contribution to Wisconsin conservation. Aldo Leopold wrote that to keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. Steve's impact has spanned every cog and wheel of the water cycle. Lakes, wetlands, coastal areas, groundwater, and of course rivers have all been the beneficiary of Steve's work. At the same time, he's conducted that work at local, state, and national scales. Lake management districts, watershed councils, local river groups have all profited from the work of Dr. Bourne. He helped found the Black Earth Creek Watershed Association near Madison and aided most, if not all, of the Trout Unlimited local chapters in Wisconsin. Steve's impact at the state level is also extensive, beginning with his work with UW Extension to his leadership of the Office of State Planning and Energy under Governor Lucey in the 1970s. He has had broad influence on myriad issues affecting conservation and natural resources. Steve also played a pivotal role in the development of Thousand Friends of Wisconsin, serving as board member and board chair. And then, of course, there's that trout obsession of Steve's, as Harry talked about. It doesn't end with the last cast. Steve has made a profound impact on cold water resource advocacy with his years of service to both the Wisconsin State Council of Trout Unlimited and as a TU national board member for many years. Steve also promoted and propelled watershed and river groups around the nation. His Four Corners project for the National River Group River Network is still cited as a local advocacy primer for protecting and restoring freshwater streams. Art does not come easy. A mere recitation of the volumes of work that Steve has performed at each scale still don't capture the essence of his contributions. Steve has always understood the importance of the promise of the Wisconsin idea. The borders of the university should extend to the borders of the state and beyond. For it is not enough to study and write about public policy. You must act on what you learn. Dr. Bourne's manuscripts are literal how-tos for water health. Here are just a sample. Integrated Environmental Management, 1995. Protecting Water Quality by Managing Local Land Use, 1990. The Watershed Approach, an Empirical Assessment of Innovation in Environmental Management, 2000. Lake Rehabilitation, a Status Report, 1979. Assessing Networked Coastal Management Programs, 1988. And one of my favorites, and it was shown on the video, Exploring Wisconsin's Trout Streams, The Angler's Guide. It was published in 1997 with co-authors Jeff Mayers, Andy Morton, and Bill Sanzoni. Did much more than just talk about trout fishing. It was also a primer on cold water conservation. And he then took action to push forward the writings. Let me give you one example. His work on groundwater management in the 1970s led to his serving as the representative of Governor Tony Earl in drafting Wisconsin's groundwater quality legislation in the early 1980s. That law, which is still pointed to as a model for the nation, has been employed over 135 times to address emerging contaminants like mercury, benzene, toluene, atrazine, PCBs, and now the catalyst behind our work to regulate the human-made suite of contaminants known as PFAS. Steve's work to help found the River Alliance of Wisconsin nearly 30 years ago was rooted in the belief that our flowing waters needed a voice. And then once the group was founded, his students produced a report on dam removals in Wisconsin that became a pivotal tool that the River Alliance employed to help get dozens of old obsolete dams out of our waterways. Steve's art is woven from a fabric that is drenched in water. And perhaps one of his most enduring works as coach is as co-chair of the Waters of Wisconsin project back at the turn of this century. Public meetings were held throughout the state. Tribal nations were an integral part of the effort in the drafting of the report and the open and inclusive process that culminated in a conference of hundreds of people in Madison. The Waters of Wisconsin report still provides a roadmap to Wisconsin water health. Art does not come easy. Not everything in the report became public policy. And today, the winds of our state can blow hard against science-based water management. But Steve's action throughout his career remind us of what is necessary to effect change. I would also be remiss if I didn't touch on Professor Bourne's contributions to teaching. Steve served twice as chair of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning and as faculty director of the Nelson Institute's Water Resources Management Program. He inspired generations of students, demanded excellence in his classes, and set a standard that the rest of us have tried to emulate. As mentioned earlier, Steve's lifetime of work covers all aspects of the water cycle. But the only thing he hasn't worked on is the air. But he didn't need to. Because to work with and to know Steve is to experience a one-of-a-kind atmospheric deposition. His wit, tenacity, and yes, art infuses us, and carries us to new levels of learning, collaboration, and action. And along the way, you just might catch a few fish. So congratulations, my friend, Dr. Steve Bourne, and your selection to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Todd. Yes, art doesn't come easy, but neither does conservation, as we all know. And one must act indeed. Yes, we must. And thanks to Steve, we have a great guide to follow in taking those actions. So what I'd like to do now is bestow the honor, Steve, on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation. We officially recognize you, Steve Bourne, as being inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. We'd now like to share the induction plaque that we have created to hang in the gallery. The plaque reads, "His contributions, like the guidance he provided as a teacher, have shaped the lands and waters of our state in critical ways as they have rippled out far beyond Wisconsin," by Kurt Miney. The other quote is from John J. Magnuson. "His common sense for the dimensions and framework on which public policy should be based are unrivaled." This plaque will is hanging right behind me, right here, in the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Gallery at Schmeekley Reserve on the Stevens Point campus, UW Stevens Point campus. So congratulations, Steve. You are now an esteemed member of a group of conservationists in our state and in our nation who are unsurpassed. And we are so excited to hear your words today, words that we are eager to hear, I'm sure. So Steve, I would like to turn the podium over to you.
Thanks for all those kind words beforehand. When I discovered that Harry Peterson had some slides largely of fishing, along with some of the earlier video, I was really suspecting that a number of people who might have tuned in would think they had accidentally contacted the Outdoor Network or Fly Fishing the World, but that's not the case. I am extremely pleased to be here today. I was joking with my fellow inductee, Stan Temple, about this day, and we both agreed it's far better to be recognized prehumously than the alternative. And I wanted to thank all those friends, family, and colleagues who are no doubt saturated with Zoom events after this very difficult year for giving up a chunk of their Saturday morning to join this induction ceremony. I'm very honored to be the 100th inductee into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, where such national conservation giants as Leopold, Charles Van Hise, Sigurd Olson, John Muir, and Gaylord Nelson are enshrined. And to join the contemporary friends and colleagues from many walks of life, scientists, citizen activists, educators, journalists, who have shaped our state's conservation heritage. People like Bud Jordahl, Martin Hansen, Nina Leopold Bradley, Buzz Bazadny, George Meyer, Bob Hunt, the list goes on. It is people in and outside of the Conservation Hall of Fame that have been the bedrock of Wisconsin's progressive conservation tradition and leadership. As a young man, I followed Horace Greeley's dictum to go west, young man. And I left the Midwest to pursue graduate work, as Todd noted, at the University of Oregon. Inspired by the spectacular resources and landscapes of the West and the cultural energy of the region, I spent the next 5 years out there. I've returned to Wisconsin twice. In 1966 to finish my graduate work, and then again from the Desert Research Institute in Reno to take a position with the University of Wisconsin in late 1969. The job was uniquely attractive, a chance to work with a group of interdisciplinary academics, natural resource professionals, and local community leaders and conservationists to restore and better manage the thousands of inland lakes that define the Upper Great Lakes region. I never planned on staying, figuring that in 5 years or so, I'd head back to my romance with the West. But somehow, I never got around to leaving. The men and women I met and worked with were cheerleaders for everything Wisconsin. The people, its progressive traditions, the scientific leadership, the clean government, the unparalleled natural resources, even Badger football, which was horrible in those days, and such food wonders as fried cheese curds. They incessantly hype the incomparable diversity of the landscape and the biota. They extolled the Northwoods pineries, the innumerable lakes and rivers and wetlands, the vegetative tension zone across the middle of the state, remnant oak savannas and prairies, the great river on the west, the Great Lakes seashore, and so forth. Now, these were significant resources, but early on, I didn't much appreciate these inflated, hyperbolic local perspectives. After all, in any 150-mile east-west transect inland from the Pacific Ocean out west, one went from beaches and headlands, estuaries and tidal pools, up to coastal mountain ranges, and then down to river valleys populated with the miracle of salmon runs, and then up to the grandiose volcanic and granitic peaks of the Cascades or the Sierras, and then back down into deserts and sagebrush regions to the east. Now, that was diversity. But in time, I gained an understanding of Wisconsin's more subtle environment, and seeing our conservation leaders and scientists and the Badger Nation up close, I drank the Wisconsin Kool-Aid. My own passion for conservation and environmental protection stems from the environmental movement of the 1960s. While always an outdoor enthusiast and an angler, the clean water battles of the 60s, when I had just come back to Wisconsin, stand out. The Chicago Tribune had launched a campaign with all of the images one could imagine to save Lake Michigan. There were stories daily on the polluted rivers in Wisconsin, our namesake Wisconsin River, the Fox River. There were threats to Lake Superior from mining and dredge spoils disposing. And the lakes in general in the South, as well as small streams throughout the region, were suffering from over-fertilization. And farther away, the battles in California and Nevada to halt the destruction of Pyramid Lake, and the Paiute Indians whose lives centered on that incredible resource. Well, my values and commitment going forward were cast. I'm proud of contributions I've made to individual conservation projects. Habitat restoration on a stretch of impaired driftless region trout stream. Work to protect a threatened species like Lahontan cutthroat. Acquisition of a particular ecologically valuable property or public access, or removal or prevention of a dam on a river. But while such efforts are very positive, I've come to think of them as only doing one thing right. Much of my work in recent decades has dealt with not just doing one thing right, but attempting to do the right thing. For me, that has meant advancing approaches that get beyond compartmentalizing problems and beyond silo thinking, and to start dealing with interconnected parts of ecological and human systems. These ideas have been put forth for decades, including by luminaries in the Conservation Hall of Fame. Aldo Leopold popularized such ecologic thinking, emphasizing the animals, plants, soil, geology, water, and climate are all part of a community of life, integrated pieces of a whole. Gaylord Nelson recognized the nature of an interconnected biological system. And there were always parts of his speeches that reminded people that we're all part of a web of life. The challenge has been implementing, putting into practice this complex concept of integrated environmental management, taking into account the various resource components, the myriad and often conflicting uses we make of those resources, the varied users, interests, and governmental jurisdictions involved, and the definition of the scale of any intervention. In short, integrated environmental management focuses on the whole as well as the parts and on the complicated interconnections. But in our society, it's the parts that govern. At best, the whole advises. Therein lies part of the challenge. Trying to put this approach into practice, evaluating the results, and pushing the concept ahead, always with an array of coworkers and collaborators, is work I am proud of. We've had our share of setbacks in these endeavors, but we've tried to learn from them and move ahead. And students and agency staff and local conservationists who continue this work around the country are a source of both pride and hope. The other effort that has preoccupied me over the years is in trying to strengthen the human and organizational dimensions of conservation work. We all herald individual conservationists who have led various conservation campaigns and initiatives, but much of the success goes beyond the individual to organizations like Trout Unlimited and the River Alliance of Wisconsin, and local watershed groups and regional land trusts that have built the capacity to sustain their conservation work over time beyond the time of individuals. We laud the conservation outcomes as we fish a restored trout stream, or hike an ice age trail, or marvel at a scenic vista along the Wisconsin Riverway, sometimes forgetting the creative and the nuts and bolts work of so many folks working through their organizations that made dreams and ideas reality. I hope that part of my legacy will have been to strengthen, even in some small way, the workings of such entities. They represent the muscle and the tissue of our conservation movement. In thinking about the future of conservation efforts in Wisconsin, and for that matter, everywhere, it would be easy to succumb to pessimism, even fatalism. In the face of climate change, extinctions and loss of biodiversity, destruction of habitats, water and health crises, gross inequalities around the planet, the toxicity of politics almost everywhere, crazy conspiracy theorists, science deniers, and more. The challenge is huge. But I find grounds for optimism in today's young people. In a few short years, they will be the conservation activists, scientists, educators, and change makers. With their values, their passion, and their knowledge, they will pursue doing the right thing here in Wisconsin and all over Carl Sagan's little blue dot, our only home. In closing, I want to express a huge debt of gratitude to the nominators and the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame board and staff that made this special recognition possible. I'm sure glad I stayed in Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So are we. I just feel a lot of hope in your words today, in your inspiration, and for all of the ways that you have charted a course for a healthier future for all of us and our beloved trout. We thank you. We will now hear the remarks from Representative Katrina Shanklin, who will share a state of Wisconsin recognition.
Hi there, this is State Representative Katrina Shanklin with a citation of commendation from the state of Wisconsin. Know you by these presents. Whereas Dr. Stephen Bourne studied at the University of Oregon in Illinois before earning his master's degree in water resources management and a PhD in geology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, later joining the faculty of the University of Wisconsin in 1969 and holding positions in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning and the Institute for Environmental Studies. And whereas he has proven to be an excellent educator to his students, many of whom have gone on to hold vital roles in public sector resource management, nonprofit conservation advocacy, and private sector sustainability efforts thanks to his expert instruction. And whereas Dr. Bourne has a storied background in public service, working as the director of the State Planning Office and State Energy Director, in addition to serving as the chief advisor for former Governor Patrick Lucey and as a member of Governor Tommy Thompson's Blue Ribbon Stewardship Task Force. And whereas he has been involved in non-governmental environment organizations, including River Alliance of Wisconsin, 1,000 Friends of Wisconsin, and Trout Unlimited, bringing his leadership skills to each organization by expanding grassroots volunteer networks. And whereas he has loved fishing all his life and contributed to the field of research in stream ecology by co-authoring the book Exploring Wisconsin Trout Streams, The Angler's Guide, a detailed account of cold water resources and excellent fishing opportunities unique to Wisconsin. And whereas Stephen Bourne has been inducted to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for his extensive work in environmental education, water management, and environmental planning. Now, therefore, the members of the Wisconsin Legislature, on the motion of Representative Katrina Shanklin, do hereby honor Dr. Stephen Bourne for his outstanding service and commitment to conservation and thank him for his inspiring leadership.
On behalf of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame Foundation and the state of Wisconsin, Steve Bourne, we congratulate you. As we near the end of this ceremony today, we are now letting you know, as a live attendee, you have the opportunity to go into the chat feature now and put some messages in there to share with Steve. Maybe there's a memory, maybe there's a fishing story. Maybe there's some way that Steve has affected your life that you wanted to make sure that you shared with him. We'll leave the chat on for 5 minutes as we conclude the ceremony. A recording of this ceremony will be available on our website, the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame website, by the end of the month. And we encourage you to watch it again and again. It'll be available there for decades to come as we continue to honor Steve Bourne's legacy for always. And for those that couldn't join us today, we hope that you'll encourage them to view the recording there. Would you like to make a donation in honor of Steve Bourne to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame? You're very welcome to do that at our website, wchf.org. And you just click on the Join and Donate tab. Any donations that we receive help us share the accomplishments of Steve Bourne and other inductees with an even wider audience as we continue our mission of celebrating, advancing, and sharing Wisconsin's conservation legacy as we honor our conservation heroes. Thank you in advance for that. We want to thank our sponsors again, the Aldo Leopold Foundation, the Ice Age Trail Alliance, the Jaeger Mellerop Family Charitable Trust, Luther College, Midwest Renewable Energy Association, Museum of Danish America, the Prairie Enthusiasts, Trout Unlimited Wisconsin Council, Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and the Wisconsin Wildlife Federation. Our registrations are still open for those other 3 inductees today, Jens Jensen at 11 o'clock, Stan Temple at 1, and Gary Eldred at 3. This concludes our event. As you share your thoughts in the chat, I'm going to read some excerpts of the congratulations messages, and we'll be preparing a transcript of the thoughts that you put in the chat, so Steve won't miss any of them. And then we're going to play the tribute, the video tribute to Steve Bourne over and over again. So Steve, we thank you again. We congratulate you, and thanks to everybody for joining us. Now on to a couple of those congratulations as you're continuing to put some notes for Steve Bourne in the chat. We've got a message from John and Judith Hutchinson that came into our office. Steve, we're so glad that you've been inducted into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. You can now join with so many other friends who have won the honor. You are joining a truly amazing group of people who have contributed so much to the state of Wisconsin and beyond. It's wonderful to see your legacy live on. Well done, sir. And then congratulations from Mark Monaco. Mark says, or Monaco perhaps, Mark says, my congratulations for Steve Bourne's induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. And it's about time he received this accolade for his great conservation achievements, which included teaching UW students and so many others about watersheds, sustainable ecosystem planning, and many other aspects of our natural world that many see but do not always appreciate. He also says, Steve, I hope he finally sees one of those Florida panthers that have somehow eluded him over the years. I'm guessing he saw that one saw him grading papers with a single malt on his houseboat and spread the word. Only you know that story out there, Mark. And then Dave Stevenson, a well-deserved and hearty congratulations to a very close friend, colleague, muskie fishing companion, island camper, co-author of an almost Meisner Award-winning paper on inland lakes, and source of so many newsworthy articles during this past difficult year. I will share one of Steve's motto. He says, this is no dress rehearsal. You only go around once, so live life to the fullest the way you choose. Thank you for that inspiration, Steve Bourne. Congratulations again, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We'll play that tribute twice through so that you can enjoy the rest of his story over again.